I'm going to throw it to the audience, and I'm going to take a question from Judy. Judy, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Judy. I'm from the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and I really appreciate all your comments and your sharing of information. I'm on the other end of things. I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm trying to actually gain weight. So just wondering if your comments about the eating window ending at 6 would still apply as well as no snacks, because Brenda Davis does recommend having some snacks to gain weight. FYI, I am in my 60s and I do have some low bone density, so I am trying to put the pounds on. And I do follow most of your recommendations, but I do have some intolerances to large amounts of like nuts and seeds and
food. So that's what I would recommend, that you do smaller amounts. But don't exclude them totally. And then and I would probably, even though Brenda is one of my heroes and I love Brenda, I would probably recommend 4 meals a day, 4 equal size meals, as opposed to 3 meals with snacking, because I would space the 4 meals out so you could increase the protein bioavailability of each meal, which means that by mixing beans and nuts and vegetables and greens and artichokes or quinoa, by having grain and bean and by having a little bit of different foods mixed in a meal, you'll have better ability to gain weight and for muscle development. And by doing that 4 times a day is better than doing it 3 times a day with a snack in between. So I prefer you to, if you need more to gain weight, probably go to a 4 meal a day plan over 3. But I still would want you to finish eating by 6 o'clock, because we still want you to not to be digesting at nighttime when you're sleeping. It's not good for your longevity and health. Okay. And remember, you gain muscle in the gym. And if you wanted to have your body to have an enhanced digestive capacity to increase that protein in terms of muscle, we want you to not do a lot of aerobics, but do a lot of muscle type building exercises, to get a little larger.
All right. We're going to take a question from Alex. Alex, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, this is Alex from California. Thank you for the great presentation. I would like to ask, what is your opinion about fruits that have a big amount of sugar, like mango and pineapple? And in addition, what are your opinion about foods that have whole food that have high saturated fat, like coconut, cacao, like dark chocolate? What are your opinion on this? Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that that the tropical fruits that have more sugar are fine, and because we're using them as a dessert in a small portion of the meal. So if you look at the total glycemic load of the meal, it's relatively low, because we're not having a pineapple-based meal or a mango-based meal. We're having 1 piece of fruit to finish a vegetable-based meal. And the 1 piece of fruit utilized the amount of grams of sugar there, the 10 grams of sugar, in conjunction with the whole meal itself, means your overall glycemic effect of that meal is still very low. And when you're eating all these healthy foods, we're talking about beans and nuts and mushrooms and onions and scallions, we're eating all these foods, then we have what scientists call the second meal effect. It means you build up such a healthy biofilm that it's when you eat a mango or some pineapple, it slows the absorption of glucose. So it's not as highly glycemic for a person who wasn't eating a healthy diet. So these people on these keto diets, we feel like, I can't eat a mango or a piece, or even oatmeal, because my sugar jumps through the roof. Well, the reason your sugar jumps through the roof is because you're eating all the saturated fat that damage your insulin receptors. Now your insulin receptors don't work, and so you're insulin resistant, and now the sugar, and you have the biofilm that you created is pro-inflammatory, and the food rushes into your bloodstream fast. But us people, the Nutritarian, this healthy way of eating means our insulin receptors are working, our biofilm is working, and we can tolerate some fruit without negative effects. So we're not, and I don't recommend a fruitarian diet or a fruit predominant diet, because if you have too much fruit, then you're lowering the protein quality of your diet. So the scientific studies show that the other non-fruit plant-based foods are more protein rich, and we reduce animal protein and increase more protein rich foods, which include grains like quinoa, amaranth, right? Vegetables, beans, nuts, and all are relatively high in protein, and things like artichokes and broccoli and asparagus are high protein foods too. So when we eat too much fruit, we dilute the protein density, the plant protein density of our diet. So by having a small amount of fruit for dessert, 3 to 5 pieces of fruit a day, you're still fine. And we're not eating all tropical fruits either. We're eating some berries and citrus, and we're eating some lower sugar fruits with lower glycemic load too. So certainly you can eat some of the higher sugar fruits in moderation. And the next question about, yes, I agree that we shouldn't eat much saturated fat in the form of coconut oil. And if you're having coconut, like shredded coconut, we have some of that in certain recipes, in a little Thai curry sauce or something, but it's only a small amount here and there. It's not something we're having every day, and it's not something we're having in large amounts. So I don't think we have to be fearful of a little bit of saturated fat when we're eating otherwise a healthy diet. And it's not as little, but still, it's not something I'm recommending as a health food, though. We're still eating that in small amounts. Okay, I hope that helped.
Thank you. So many speakers recommend no salt, but in the book, The Salt Fix, he recommends that salt is good and necessary. What are your thoughts on salt, and how much can we have in a day in a healthy diet?
Well, it's funny because I answered this question in the group, the group presentation as well. But yes, then primates do not salt their foods. And primates get enough sodium from the salt we eat that's in the vegetables and natural foods we're eating. And that's adding salt to our food over and above what comes in the natural food doesn't just increase risk of high blood pressure. The studies show it also increases risk of cardiovascular death and stroke, irrespective of its effect on raising blood pressure. It also suppresses immunity, increases risk of infection, increases risk of, and it gradually causes microvascular hemorrhaging over time, over a lifetime, weakening the interior lining of blood vessels, leading to a higher propensity for hemorrhagic stroke, breaking of a blood vessel. So yes, I'm saying salt is a pernicious habit, and it's your lifetime exposure to salt that determines your risk. It's your lifetime exposure to the right omega-3 index determines your brain size in later life. You can't say, oh, look, I have this person who went to these people on a low salt diet are having higher risk of death. Those studies are based on people who ate a high salt diet their whole life, and because they developed serious illness, went to a low salt diet. But it's their lifetime exposure to salt that determined their risk. They shouldn't have waited till they got that sick to cut the low salt out. That's why they got sick. So so some of these studies artificially make it look like a low salt diet is dangerous because people who are cutting out salt aren't doing that well, because the people that are cutting out the salt are people who are sickly, who had to cut out salt, or are told to cut out salt after they develop disease. And it's not the salt intake in the last 5 years of our life that determines our cardiovascular death. It's our full lifetime exposure to sodium that determines our cardiovascular death. So it's an insidious and chronic exposure to these causes of disease that count. And the same thing is true with the right fatty acids for the brain and for the body, and why these ultra low fat diets and people who are not concerned about their omega-3 index can use the same arguments. Oh, this person took it and they later in life and it didn't make much change, or it didn't get into the brain, or whatever they're talking about, because they started it when they already had dementia or something. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing with eating junk food. We can't eat junk food our whole life. And then once we get sick, try to cut it out then. We got to do it now. Today's the day. So I'm saying that there's an overwhelming amount of, even though you have all information on everything I say, you can find something to the opposite. You have the carnivore diet and the tiger diet and the porcupine diet, and you have all these people doing crazy diets to kill people. And you can find people telling you to eat more cholesterol and more saturated fat and more salt and more junk food and more meat and more cheese, whatever. You can find any kind of diet that you want to eat. You can find people supporting it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we have an overwhelming amount of corroborative evidence. Corroborative evidence means we look at all the studies and we see where the massive evidence points and evaluate that in the most logical and consistent manner. Both sides, all the evidence, and the evidence points obviously to long-term exposure. The body gets acclimated to low salt intake by holding on to sodium. We're not sweating it out and not urinating it out, and it keeps the minerals in our body. We don't need, and it keeps all our electrolytes more favorable and all the minerals more favorable. Because with a high salt diet, we're urinating out a lot more minerals too, causing cramping and other problems. So yes, I'm an advocate of a low sodium diet and of not adding salt to your food. And the amount of salt I think is acceptable is somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 milligrams a day. So we're talking about making sure people are under 1,000 for the day of milligrams of sodium per day. And that's what the data shows in the scientific studies. It shows that as you go from 3,000 to 1,500 to 1,000, you still get benefits in reduction of cardiovascular death when it's done earlier in life and maintained for for decades.
Thank you so much. Our next question is going to be asked from Cynthia. Cynthia, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hello, Dr. Fuhrman. This is Cynthia, and I'm from New York. Thank you very much for the wonderful educational discussion. I'd like to know about the autoimmune conditions such as hypothyroidism. Can that be reversed by a whole food plant-based diet? Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. The answer is that, I've had a lot of experience reversing autoimmune conditions like ulcerative colitis and lupus and psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndrome and connective tissue disease. And I've had lots of experience with that. And I haven't seen a lot of people reverse Hashimoto's thyroiditis and hypothyroidism. So I don't think that even it is autoimmune, it's an hypoautoimmune. It's mostly due to endocrine disrupting and chemical exposure that permanently damages the thyroid. I have had a few cases who reversed their hypothyroidism because they came to me because they got it when they were like 19 years old or 23 years old and they were young, and they switched them to a healthy diet and it went away. But most people who've had it for years and it's more ingrained and their thyroid is not producing enough hormone need to take the hormone for the rest of their life. And they could take less once they're eating healthy and lose weight, and they can take less, but they still need some to keep their TSH between 2 and 4. I don't want the TSH maximally suppressed. I don't want to take excessive amounts, but you should take enough to keep your TSH in the 2 to 4 range. So most people cannot stop taking it completely.
Thank you. Ruth, please state where you're from and ask a question.
I'm from Canada, and my question is about oxalates. If somebody is on a low oxalate diet, it looks like they're not supposed to be eating most of the things that you're talking about: the nuts, the different kinds of nuts, the berries, the beans. Oh my gosh, it goes on and on. Chocolate, like the cacao, and breads, and even oatmeal is apparently a high oxalate food. And I was reading a book by Sally K. Norton, Norton, and she was a dietitian.
You only have a few minutes left, so I think I've heard enough.
Okay.
Let me comment, okay?
Okay.
Just like the salt issue, you have a lot of nonsensical people giving poor advice. And that I've cared for many people who were stone formers, and we have to put them on moderate, and we reduce their oxalate. But the basic levels to prevent oxalate damage is not to have animal products and animal protein in your diet, because animal protein causes precipitation of oxalate as calcium oxalate in the kidney, and causing nephrocalcinosis and stones. So the oxalates are damaging in people who are oxalate formers, but they don't have to cut out oxalates out of the diet. They have to cut the animal protein out. And we do not eat, when we do tell those people to reduce the highest oxalate foods like raw spinach, raw Swiss chard, not cooked, you can still have cooked spinach, but it's just parsley, Swiss chard, rhubarb, Swiss and beet tops and spinach that are the high oxalate foods. All the other foods you mentioned are relatively low in oxalates and not a concern, even for people who are stone formers. I've had so many people over the years who are stone formers, or nephrocalcinosis, who are oxalate, people who don't do well on high oxalate intake. And all we had to do was give them a little B6, have them drink a glass and give them, and cut the animal protein out, move them to a vegan diet. And we can track the calcium in their urine, the calcium oxalate formation. And they never had another stone form, and they never had another problem. And then we checked their urine oxalates to make sure they're not forming oxalates in their urine anymore. And they weren't once we've got them on a healthy eating diet with all the excess animal protein. So you're reading a lot of nonsensical things. And there's not 1 in 1,000 people that even have to be concerned about this. And certainly I doubt you have to be concerned about it either. You're getting false information. I don't think that you have to, the concern about oxalates is such that you have to take out all healthy food and just eat an unhealthy diet to avoid oxalates. It's just not true.